We're at the European Business Summit in Brussels, and we're talking with Mikael Haagstrom, and he is the chairman of the Executive Council of the American Chamber of Commerce in the EU. Welcome.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
In terms of the economic crisis, what are some of the issues that are still worrying your organization? What are still some of the problems here?
Well, we actually commissioned a study on the competitiveness of Europe 2020, and it found some top priorities. It was actually 8 of them, but I'll highlight the top 3. Number 1 is the completion of the single market, and it is really a concern now for us as corporations that if we don't, first of all, the upside of completing the single market is estimated to a GDP of an additional 4%. An additional 4% growth is the expectation by completing that single market. And there are additional areas of growth, such as the service industry and getting the export, EU more representative in the export. It's 70% of internal production, but very low part of export. They can yield another 1.5%. So the single market is key because the alternative, which is 0 to low growth, will lead to a lot of internal friction within the system. And we see some of that already now with the border type debates that has come up recently. And that also links to the skills question that we highlight very clearly, and that is that we have a shortage of specific skills in Europe, and we really need to look at an agenda, a proactive agenda for addressing the skill shortage in specific areas, specifically in new technologies and so on. So if we look at, for instance, the energy agenda, the main consumptions is in cities. If we can drive green technologies, which is innovative new technology, it's going to require, for instance, the STEM skills, the technology, mathematics, etc. skills, and engineers, which we do have a shortage of, and many members, companies find hard to find in Europe. So a strong agenda on the skills, and also be able to attract specific talent from abroad is a very important function of driving the innovation.
What about the relationship to China and emerging markets? I mean, China is the number 2 economy. Its presence is felt everywhere.
Yeah.
Is that a threat or something to be leveraged by the EU, by the AmCham in the EU?
Well, first, I just want to highlight that when we look at trade, and not just the trade figures, but also the investment figures, the links, the transatlantic links between EU and US are by far out-dominating the other trends that you see, or even this fast growth is from a low base. And that's important because if you take one country, like right now we're here in Belgium, there is actually more trade and investment between Belgium and the US than what it is between US and China, or the whole of EU and China. And I think that is important in perspective.
What about the situation right now with sovereign debt and the economic problems within the European Union? Is this worrying for some of your members? Is it because it's impacting the euro, and the euro is pretty strong right now?
Well, that is one of our largest concerns, because if the member states, for instance, look at saving short term, they are going to cut budgets that are directed towards education or innovation. Also, when we have seen some of the negotiations that's been going on in some countries already now, that for instance, to settle disputes around how to do pension reforms, they agree to border protection or goods protection and the like. And those type of actions will definitely negatively impact the growth and the competitiveness of Europe. The study clearly indicated that Europe has 10 years to get that right, and that's not a long period. And the difference is extreme between leadership and between laggard, and I believe that is a very serious topic to get the single market completed.
So is it better to be cutting deficits aggressively, like the UK is doing, or to maybe think about spending your way, stimulating the economy a little bit more to create jobs, which may or may not turn out to be long-term? To some extent, the US is trying to do that, but France and Germany have been doing that.
I think it has to be both. And the reason why I'm saying both is that it's the growth areas, the innovative areas that needs to be invested in. I mentioned green tech, but it's also the reform of the health industry and other areas, the health aging, etc., the demographic topics that are driving a lot of costs now and down the line. that's where investment is needed. It's not significant investment, but the budget is coming up for the EU, and we know business as usual, the big agricultural spends, will get usually, traditionally, a higher voice than, say, innovation. So I actually do believe that there is a need to cut even harder in certain areas in order to release investments in areas that can improve growth, that can improve job creation. If we look at the service sector alone, which is an extraordinarily strong export opportunity for Europe, by just identifying current opportunities, that's 600,000 jobs immediately created in the EU according to this study, which would correspond to 1.5% of GDP. That's significant. To not do that small triggering investment it takes it there, is saving in the wrong areas. I'd rather save more in areas that are not going to help us with solving the long-term problems.
Are these more skilled jobs, or are we talking about hospital orderlies? I mean, what kind of jobs are we talking about that could be created with this small kind of investment?
On the service side, specifically, it's going to be to look at skilled labor in certain areas, but I'm not talking then a total retraining. I'm talking about converging knowledge. So if you have long-term experience as a nurse, for instance, if we talk about the health, and you spend a lot of time now with computers just entering data, not getting any use of all the, it just takes time. What if some of those tasks could be automated? What if instead of looking at what happened to a patient manually through the patient records, that could be automated? And that time could be used to actually treating patients. You get a double impact. So it's more to take that last step of innovation to apply technologies available across sectors to make things more efficient.
Right, let me end by asking you what you maybe feel optimistic about going forward. We've talked a lot about the problems. At the conference here, everybody's talking about the problems. Is there something that makes you feel optimistic about the future? And by future, I mean maybe the next 3 years or so?
Well, the thing that makes me absolutely most optimistic is that with crisis comes change. And I think there is a bigger readiness for change now than we've had in a long time. And I hope we can translate that readiness for change to actually implement change. And there is no question in my mind that some of the change might be uncomfortable up front, but the dialogue is going to be critical in order to understand what the alternatives are. So public-private dialogue is a big opportunity. Common standards is the second large opportunity between the EU and the US. And the third one, I think, is that there is not just the harmonization of the laws, but also a deeper look into how can we invest for growth. The financing of innovation, say, is starting to, the shape of that debate is starting to change. And I see that very positive. So I'm actually very encouraged. I might be an optimist, but I think there's a lot to be hopeful about at the moment. Although I would like to see more progress in areas such as the Doha round, which is a bit disappointing that that's seemingly falling off the hopes of many raters. And it would make a great impact. But overall, I'm very hopeful.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mikael Haagstrom, for being with us on INSEAD Knowledge.
Well, thank you for having me.